Hello toppers, today the topic of discussion is somewhat interesting, that is how brain survives when there is reduced blood. Already in previous video we had discussed regarding how homeostasis is working in our body and how blood pressure regulation is happening physiologically. So today we will be discussing regarding the cerebral blood flow and how it is reversed on its own whenever there is any problem. So the most inherent mechanism of our body is auto-regulation of brain. So we will be seeing how this mechanism is working. It is very interesting to know. So let's see how long a brain can survive without blood. So if there is no blood for 5 seconds, it will lead to unconsciousness, and if it is for more than 5 minutes, it will lead to irreparable brain damage. We know our brain requires large amount of blood. So let's see regarding the arterial supply. The arterial supply is mainly through our circle of Willis, which is interconnected by the internal carotid artery and basilar artery. These two arteries combine to form the circle of Willis, which forms the major arterial supply of brain. Then comes the venous supply. Here all the sinuses in the brain gets drained into the jugular vein, and which forms the major collection of venous supply. So now comes the biggest question of today's discussion: what is autoregulation? So I think you might have heard in physiology what is autoregulation. It is nothing but the inherent capacity, that is intrinsic capacity of our body. Okay, intrinsic capacity of our body to maintain the blood pressure. It's not about blood pressure, it's mainly about the blood flow to that particular organs. This we can see mainly this autoregulation feature is very effective in many vital organs, and those are heart, kidney and brain. Okay, these three organs have effective auto-regulation. Let me tell you how this thing is happening, based on which mechanism this auto-regulation is happening. Still now, there are two theories which had talked regarding this auto-regulation, that is myogenic theory, and the second one, that is metabolic theory. Let me tell you how these theories are getting operated. So, in case of myogenic theory, whenever there is increase in the mean arterial pressure, that will lead to the stretching of blood vessels. Yes, we know that this arterial pressure will literally lead to the stretching of blood vessels, that too small arteries and arterioles. So, whenever there is any stretching of blood vessel, what will happen? There will be increased calcium ion influx into the cell. Like the cell will be here and there will be lot of calcium entering inside the cell from the ECF, that is extracellular fluid. It will be entering, and this increase in the calcium will lead to constriction of the smooth muscle in the middle layer of the blood vessel, that is tunica media. There will be smooth muscles of the vessels will be there. So there will be constriction of smooth muscle, that will lead to the auto-regulation. So this will happen whenever there is, this will happen in exact opposite direction whenever there is reduction in the arterial pressure. So let me explain you again. So whenever there is increase in the mean arterial pressure, that will lead to the stretching of the blood vessels, and this stretching of blood vessel will lead to the calcium influx from the ECF into the cell, and that will lead to the constriction of smooth muscle. This is one of the theory which is explaining the myogenic theory of auto-regulation. Then let us talk regarding the metabolic theory. So, in case of metabolic theory, whenever there is reduction in the blood supply, like blood supply got reduced, only few blood supply is there, And if the blood supply is there, the end metabolites like metabolic end products will be remaining in that same place only, like it will get accumulated, that end products will be getting accumulated. So those are chemical substances. For example, those metabolites are adenosine and few other common metabolites are there. That is, like generally we know carbon dioxide, which our blood is doing the action of taking it back. Then lactate. Those things will be accumulated in the tissues. So simple, whenever there is lack of blood flow, this accumulation will be there. So whenever the accumulation is more, that will lead to the dilatation of blood vessels. So dilatation of blood vessel will be happening. So if the blood vessel which is supplying only few blood, if it is getting dilated, the size will be becoming more and we can expect a lot of blood comparing to the before. So that is the metabolic theory which we can see here in case of autoregulation. There are two mechanisms which are explaining this, as I had said. One is myogenic theory and another one is metabolic theory. So I will explain you again the metabolic theory. Whenever there is reduction in the blood flow, there will be accumulation of the metabolites in the tissues like adenosine, carbon dioxide and lactate, and that will lead to the dilatation of blood vessel, and that dilatation will lead to increase in the blood flow in that particular area. So next, before getting in detail regarding the cerebral autoregulation, let me tell you how much of blood is required for the brain. So let's see how much it is very important. It is around 750 to 800 ml, like around 15 to 16% of the total cardiac output, and 50 to 55 ml per 100 gram of brain tissue per minute is the perfusion rate of brain. So these things are more important in MCQ point of view, and this also shows how much blood supply is more important for brain. So let's see regarding the autoregulation of brain. So in autoregulation of brain, there are two mechanisms which plays a major role, that is effective perfusion pressure. Perfusion is nothing but the capacity of the blood to get perfused, like the capacity to ventilate the oxygen and carbon dioxide level. Then comes the second thing, that is cerebral vascular resistance. So let's see how things are happening, and it is quite amazing how our body is inherently having this type of capacities. So first, let us talk regarding the effective perfusion pressure. So generally, in case of pressure, there will be arterial pressure and venous pressure. So in case of brain, how things are happening? In case of our brain, usually the venous pressure is always 0 and the mean arterial pressure is the only thing which is regulating our autoregulation. So whenever the mean arterial pressure is from 60 to 140 mmHg, it will regulate the autoregulation. Then let us talk regarding the second mechanism, which is more and more important and more interesting, that is cerebral vascular resistance. So let me tell you simply, whenever there is any flow, so simple, you can imagine a water pipe which is having a flow like this. Okay. So if we are putting the tap here, what will happen? Like we are closing the tap. So resistance will be there. So whenever the flow is more, and if we are putting the resistance, then flow will decrease. So simple. Whenever I'll tell you, if the resistance is more, then water flow or blood flow, whatever it may be, it will decrease only. Okay, this is the exact relationship. So what is happening in the cerebral region? So here blood flow is there through the blood vessels. Yeah, it is coming out. So try to imagine it as a blood vessel. And and here the resistance offered by the brain. Let's see what are all the resistance offered by our brain tissue. It is nothing but, first there are three things which are offering resistance to the blood flow, that is intracranial pressure, then cerebrospinal fluid pressure. This is also offering resistance, and third one, it is the viscosity of blood. So these three things are providing the equal resistance to the blood flow. So whenever we can easily relate, whenever there is any problem with any of these three factors, that will lead to reduced blood flow. Okay, so if there is reduction in blood flow, there we can expect our body to do auto-regulation. So here comes the most interesting reflex, that is Cushing reflex, which is also called as, let me tell you after, Cushing reflex, which is the most important reflex and protective reflex at the last hand. So it is famously called as last ditch stand of pressure control mechanism. So let me tell you how this Cushing reflex is helping us. So whenever there is increase in resistance in the form of intracranial pressure and CSF pressure, what will happen? Literally it will lead to the compression of cerebral vessels, yes. And whenever there is decrease in the blood flow, what will happen? This decrease in blood flow will create the vasomotor center activation because of the hypoxia and hypercapnia. And that will lead to peripheral vasoconstriction. So whenever there is peripheral vasoconstriction, that will lead to increase in the arterial blood pressure, and that will lead to the restoration of cerebral blood flow. Let me tell you very easily. Okay. So first, as we had already discussed, resistance is increasing. Whatever it may be because of any trauma or any other issue, the resistance to blood flow is increased. So what will happen if the resistance is increasing, the pressure is more, so that will lead to the compression of blood vessels. Yes, we know that will get compressed. Blood vessel will get more and more compressed. So blood flow will be more reduced like this drop. Okay. So if there is reduction in the blood flow, already we had studied one of the theory, that is metabolic theory, which we can see here. So in case of metabolic theory, what we had studied, if there is reduction in blood flow, the metabolites will be accumulated. Okay. And this metabolites accumulation will lead to dilatation. Okay, this is the simple mechanism which we had read before. That is exactly happening here. You can see here, because of decreased cerebral blood flow, that will lead to hypoxia and hypercapnia. Yes. So this hypoxia and hypercapnia is the end metabolites. Okay. That will lead to vasomotor center activation. So whenever vasomotor center is activated based upon the stimulus of chemoreception, that will lead to vasoconstriction or vasodilatation based upon the response. So whenever there is peripheral vasoconstriction, so consider a human body. Just imagine, try to imagine this person as human. I am sorry. And whenever there is peripheral vasoconstriction, so because of this severe vasoconstriction, there won't be blood flow to the periphery. So if blood flow to the periphery is not there, then we can expect lot of blood towards the central part of our body, that is vital part of the body, which is our brain. So simple mechanism, because of the peripheral vasoconstriction, the blood flow will be more towards the brain, and mainly it will increase the arterial blood pressure. We know when blood pressure is inversely proportional to the peripheral resistance. So whenever the resistance is more in case of periphery, blood flow will be more in the central part. Okay. So somehow finally restoration of cerebral blood flow is happening. So this is the basic physiology which is happening even in the absence of any medication. Okay. So, okay, but somewhere it is failing. How it is failing or why it is failing? That is leading to lot of death which is happening before taking the patient to the hospital because of the ischemia of brain. So, here we had already seen mean arterial pressure will be increasing as we had seen in the Cushing reflex. So here they are saying, along with the increased intracranial tension, if our mean arterial pressure is also in equal ratio, then there is no worry. Our Cushing reflex will do its maximum effort to save ourselves. Okay. But whenever this arterial, this intracranial pressure is increasing more and more beyond this mean arterial pressure, then the mechanism eventually ends up in failing. Okay. So this failing may lead to like ischemic effects in the brain, may lead to stroke and a lot of other complications, brain edema and all that we can see. So this is one of the most important MCQ in exam oriented view. Cushing's triad. We can see bradycardia, hypertension with widened pulse pressure and bradypnea. But whether anyone had thought about a question that when there is increase in BP, yes we can see, but how come there is reduction in heart rate? Whether anyone had got this question by looking at this Cushing's triad, there is a secretive mechanism happening in our body leading to this exactly. So let me tell you, because I got this question, so I just tried to find the answer, and it is also very interesting to know. So this mechanism already we know, and here we can see increased arterial pressure which is developed to maintain the cerebral blood flow. So this increase in the arterial pressure is the main causation for the reflex bradycardia which we can see in our Cushing triad. Let me tell you how it is happening. So for that, to know about that, we should know something more in detail. That is the action of our vasomotor center. So already in previous video regarding BP regulation, we had seen regarding this vasomotor center, but I am just repeating so that we can remember things easily. So in case of our vasomotor center, there are three different areas. One is vasoconstriction or cardioacceleratory area, then vasodilator or cardioinhibitory area, and sensory area. So this vasoconstriction or cardioacceleratory is nothing but sympathetic activity. Okay. So simple, I will give you one easy clue to remember the sympathetic activity of heart. So whenever you are getting sympathy towards anyone, what will happen? Our heart rate will increase. Like we will feel the palpitation if we are seeing anything very sad or sympathetic. What will happen? Like our heart rate will go up. Yes, this is the basic mechanism happening because of the sympathetic activity also. So you can remember it very easily. Then comes our vasodilator or cardioinhibitory area. It is the parasympathetic activity. So it is very opposite to sympathetic. Okay, that will lead to the decreased heart rate, very heartless personality, that is parasympathetic activity. Then comes the sensory area, that is present in the posterior part of the vasomotor center, and this sensory area used to receive the impulses from the baroreceptors through the cranial nerve 9 and 10, and after receiving the impulses from the baroreceptor, it will analyze whether the heart rate has to be reduced or heart rate has to be increased. Based on that, this impulses will be passed to vasoconstrictor area, or if there is need to reduce it, then it will pass the impulses to the vasodilator area. So this is the main area where the sensations will be received, and these two areas are the motor areas which will react according to the sensation received. So simple. So let me tell you the answer for the question. We had seen there is increase in the arterial pressure. We had seen, and that is leading to bradycardia, that is reduction in heart rate. So simple. Here what is happening? Whenever there is increase in the arterial pressure, that will be sensed by two things. Lot of things are there, but two important mechanisms are there, that is baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. They will pass the impulses through cranial nerve 9 and 10, and they will run directly to the vasomotor center, mainly to the sensory area which is present in the posterior part, and they will say, array, it's the arterial pressure is very high, so we have to do something. Like that, impulses will be passed to the sensory area. Then what sensory area will do? Now sensory area came to know that the pressure is low. So in order to reduce the pressure, directly it has to reduce the heart rate. So as a reflex mechanism, it will stimulate the vasodilator area, which is leading to the bradycardia of Cushing's reflex. Okay. So this is the answer for our most important $1,000,000 question, which is why Cushing's triad is having bradycardia in the place of hypertension. Okay. So I think the video is going to end, and happy learning.